introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Aditi Joshi, and in short, I am an emergency room physician, and I have been for about 11 years. But about 7 years ago, I became involved in working with a telemedicine startup. And then almost 3.5 years ago, I started working for an academic hospital. So I work in the ER department, and we run a huge telehealth program there. The part that I'm in charge of is acute care telehealth, which is both doing it in the ER, what we call teletriage, and then people who are sitting at home who need healthcare can access us. So over the last few years, we haven't actually found that a lot of people have used it, and then all of a sudden we've become very popular. And all the skills that I've garnered in the last few years have become very relevant and necessary and crucial during this pandemic.
Because I hear you saying people haven't been that interested. Do you mean the patients? Like, what's the temperature with the profession? Do you feel like doctors are open to telemedicine, but patients aren't? I'm just curious.
So we'll do before March 1st and then after. So prior to that, I think there were a lot of barriers. One, it wasn't paid for. So it just ended up, or it wasn't paid for in a manner that, doctors' clinics thought was necessarily useful. They didn't know enough about it, right? They didn't have the technology. And we're kind of set in our ways in medicine. We tend to do what we see is right and the way we do things for years, mainly because we think that's the safest way for patients. And because we deal with patients and life or death, we tend not to want to change things quickly because we're afraid that it's going to be for the worse. And so we're very careful on updating and taking on new things. So that was part of it. So now it ends up being a chicken and the egg, because a lot of times patients aren't comfortable if their doctors are not offering it. And then doctors are not offering it because they think patients don't want it, and they may not feel comfortable. They don't think it's real medical care. Then on top of the fact that it's not necessarily paid for, people didn't know what it was. There were a lot of things that got in the way of it. We did it anyway. A lot of people were future thinking, realizing that you can do a lot of healthcare from home. And so me personally, so in my first company, I probably saw about 10,000 patients just in acute care telehealth. I've seen probably 5,000 just on teletriage. So I'm probably somewhere around like 20,000 plus. And so I did a couple of things with that type of experience, which is I made a course for how to do a physical exam, helped make the courses here on how we train physicians in how to do this so they feel safer doing it. And so I'm well versed in that particular aspect. So then, the other portion of it is just getting people onboarded to telehealth and making them understand what it can be used for. And so the best way I describe it is that you're trying to get actionable information. So somebody's at home, you're really determining, hey, are you sick or not, right? That's the first thing you do. But the reality is that's exactly what I do in the emergency room too. It's not different really. That's what I'm trying to figure out first thing. Second is, depending on what the complaint is do you need to be seen right away or not? And if not, what would be the next course of action? What kind of symptomatic treatment can I give you? What kind of counseling? What kind of information? A lot of times people don't realize that they can do quite a bit on video unless they try it. Once they try it, they realize it. And there is, again, that barrier of thinking about that. But you just think about the fact that our lives have changed significantly over technology in the last 10 years. This shouldn't be that difficult to imagine, right? We use Skype and we use FaceTime all the time. People use Zoom for meetings. And yet people found this to be a strange concept. There are so many times I'd be on with a patient and they'd be like, oh, you are a real doctor. Or, oh, this is actually really easy. Or, oh, okay, thank you for that information. Or I was worried I had to go to the ER. Okay, I'm glad I don't have to. Or yes, I do need to go and this is what I want you to do. I think that ends up helping patients just get better information rather than using WebMD and then getting scared. But we didn't see a lot of patients doing that, right? And so what happened on, obviously, March is it became absolutely crucial that people needed to stay at home, and we needed to get people to not come out in the public. Try to avoid the ER if you could. Try to avoid urgent cares. Try to avoid your doctor's clinics. Even if you weren't necessarily sick, just the fact that COVID you can be carrying it around and be asymptomatic. And so this became a crucial need. How do you get to people while at their home? So that's why it basically exploded.
So this must be somewhat validating for you, not that you're excited about the terrible pandemic that's happening around the world, but for you to feel like you've had this tool for so long that you're trying to get people to pay attention to, that then all of a sudden they actually need.
It's validating, yes, that we were right about how and what the future of healthcare would be. It is a distressing reason for it. But for me personally, I also think that everything that I've done up until now, everything I've done with my colleagues who work with me, everything that the healthcare institution that I work at, it really has like led to something that I think could really be useful in this pandemic. So here at Jefferson, where I work now, because we had this program already, we were able to just scale it up. And we said, okay, all outpatient clinics, all urgent cares, all EDs, if someone is calling for information or they need testing, call us first. First thing, don't come in, call this telemedicine practice. So of course it became really busy, but all we had to do was train more physicians, and we had a whole host of them willing to do it. And that is much easier to do, right, than it is to get a technological platform, try to figure it out, and then onboard 200. We have probably 200 doctors now doing it. We went from about 50 to 200, but it's much easier to do when you already have 50 who know what they're doing. You already have the program, you already have the platform, and you have an entire hospital willing to help. And so now we're seeing the advantage of it, just being able to keep people at home. So we had in 1 week from March 2nd and March 9th, we had our normal amount of patients, a little uptick. I will say there's a little bit of uptick, but we're behind Seattle and New York as well. But in the last week, so between March 10th to the 17th, we had 4 times the amount of patients. And we had about 550 in 3 days. So that was a huge uptick. So we're seeing this huge slope up. And at first, it was overwhelming to try to keep up with it. But because we're able to onboard people I basically did it in 24 hours, really. And then people are willing to jump on. I mean, obviously, people are volunteering and they're getting me help. But just to onboard them took 24 hours. And our wait times that could have been hours or even a day, we have successfully managed to keep them under 10 minutes mostly. Every so often, I'll go up to 30 on very busy times, but that's rare. Keeping people under 10 minutes.
This is so incredible. And it's so amazing to know that it's like you guys had something, you foresaw something in a way, you had something just built in that you could step into, which is really incredible. It's inspiring, right? Because this is a moment where we feel like we're behind, and you're sharing something that feels like it's perfect, that you could just kind of step into. That's incredible.
Yeah, it feels like what we're doing matters. And for many reasons, right? It's, we're keeping people at home. They're getting information. I was working a shift yesterday, and I had at least 3 patients say, I'm a high risk patient. I really just don't want to go to the clinic. Or somebody was like, I don't know, do I bring my child to the ER? And I was like, stay home. All of you can stay home. And that is valuable. Okay. And then the other thing is we have a lot of patients who are like, okay, I might have it. What do I do? Do I need testing? Do I just need symptomatic treatment? What are my action plans? And because we were able, through our hospital, we set up a bunch of testing sites, and we are one of the places that patients can go through. We have them, again, bypass all of the on-site clinics. They call us and we send them to a testing site, and then they go on home.
That is incredible. This is so cool. And you've been part of creating this program. Tell us brag a little bit more about yourself, because as you're telling it, it sounds like you work there, but you've helped create it, correct?
Right. So the platform was running when I got here, and I'm the medical director of Jeffconnect, which is the acute care telehealth. So that means day-to-day operations. And I train all of the physicians who are onboarded onto it. I make our training materials. I also created the education, like we talked about. We did a QA process, which means quality assurance for people not in medicine, to try to make sure that all the doctors are adhering to certain guidelines, whether it be making sure they're not referring people to the wrong level, like they're going to either the urgent care or the ER that's appropriate. We're giving antibiotics at the right rate. So that's what we were doing before. And now all of that training has made it much easier to set in place all the things I needed to do. So for example, when I was setting up training for all these doctors, if you've trained a bunch of people already, you kind of know what their questions are and what the issues are. And it was a steep learning curve for me too, because they're coming from other specialties to come help, right? They're coming from family practice, they're coming from internal medicine, and they're absolutely great at this type of work as well. But, you just have to understand, like, they're still a different practice in emergency medicine. And so what does that mean? And the reality, not much. They're able to do it. It's just more getting them in the process as quickly as possible. And so I just made training videos, and I've just been on call, and I've gotten people answered. And then we're just looking at their charts, making sure they're doing it the right way. And of course, yes, a part of the onboarding, I did quite a bit of it, but I had to have help. Like, it is definitely a team effort.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I've been talking to people from all over the world since January. So I've had a vantage point of seeing this sort of shift and change and taking it seriously when other people weren't. And my own intuitiveness, it's very real. I think there are still some people that don't think this is real. Could you speak to that at all? Just like you're saying, there's an uptick. I'm sure you're.
So we have an entire, it's a, like I said, it's a team effort. So I am part of, like, we have a task force from the emergency room, and it is our operations team. It's people who are, and we have someone who is a specialist in global health. We have somebody who's in disaster management. They're all in the emergency room. And so the woman who's the specialist in global health, she is running this, and she is incredible. It is a lot of work. So all I'm doing, it's like, we call it like staying in our lane. My goal alone is to try to give them as much time as possible. Trying to keep people out of their clinics, trying to make sure that they're not feeling overburdened. So if somebody's very sick and they need to go to the ER, fine. But if they don't, I'm trying to be able to save them equipment, trying to save them from having to see or be exposed to those patients that may be able to stay home, and send them to the testing site instead. Trying to help those that are going to be quarantined or high-risk doctors, that they can still provide medical care and give us all the help we need when that happens, because it will inevitably happen. And so they may feel that they're not helping, but they can help us. They can do this for us too. It is real. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And so I know that what I'm doing is only like the first step. It's like holding up the wall. We joke around our office, like, I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, that we're like the Night's Watch at the wall, but that wall comes down, right? It comes down eventually. What we're trying to do is maybe make a portion of it come down so it trickles, as opposed to just like bursts open. That's all we can do.
Oh, I love that. I love that you guys are at the front lines, and that you're able to keep less people out of the hospital that don't actually need to go there and overwhelm the system. So that's incredible. They're so lucky to have this incredible team. I'm so excited for you. Is there anything else you want to share? Is there any advice you would give? Do you provide consultation to people that are interested in developing their own online, practices, medical practices?
We do, absolutely. And I do. We just obviously aren't right now, but we absolutely do. And so the problem, of course, is everybody is trying to scale up really quickly. And so we're getting a ton of interest and questions. We don't have time to do, obviously, from start to finish, but we do have some courses available online. We have a physical exam course that we created a couple of years ago. People have found that useful, at least to get some tips of what to do and what it looks like to actually do a visit on this. And we have basically created processes and protocols for all of these things. But I want to just stress too that telemedicine is just a form of medical care. It's just a different way of performing it. So when people ask, oh, what's your, COVID telehealth process? It's the same way you would do it anywhere. We're using the CDC guidelines. We're using our enterprise guidelines. We're just applying it over telemedicine. That's it. It's medical care.
That's awesome. So after we come to the other side of this, if there are organizations that are looking for this, can they find you on LinkedIn? Do you provide consulting? So we'll put your LinkedIn information somewhere for people to look and click. Because I can think of organizations that I work with that are interested in this. And so I love the idea that they would have access to reach out to you, because you would provide consulting. Correct? Okay.
Absolutely, we would. And now that we see the value of it, and the government has relaxed laws, making it easier for people to practice. Now that people see the value, both, providers and patients, we're not going to go back. Right now, it's just making this the best care you can at home, because why would we want to go back to a system that didn't have it now that we all know that we have access to it? We can get access at home to people who can't provide it. We can keep people out of the ER, the urgent care, if they don't need to go. People can still find information and counseling with physicians. And then eventually, it's going to be even more. We're going to get more devices at home, more healthcare at home, maybe even like algorithms and chatbots that people can use first and then determine if they even want to speak to a doctor. It's just the first step of having more home-based healthcare. And this is where it starts.
And have you always been interested in this part of medicine? Like, is this always been, how did this happen for you to be inspired?
You know, it's sort of an accident. I would say that, you know, I graduated residency in 2009. And so I was an ER doctor at a very busy place in New York. And I got burnt out quite a bit. My sister lived in San Francisco and she worked for a tech company. All her friends worked at tech companies. So I kind of knew some of their lingo and their background, but I never worked in tech specifically. And then I actually joined a startup, and then I seemed to know more about it from that. And just working for a startup itself got me more interested in tech and tech spaces and how companies grow and business development and that portion of it. But I was also clinical working for them. And then when I joined this academic hospital, it was interesting because I went there sort of doing the same clinical job that I did for the other company, but because they had such a large, wide program all over the hospital, I've been able to learn more, do different types of programs, be in different departments and learn from that as well. And so you actually are able to expand its use case as opposed to keep it to just one type. And so that has been great doing that. It's almost like the sky's the limit over here. You can do research, which I've gotten into as well, trying to figure out, is this real? Like how do we make sure that it is safe or that it does work? And this way you can do some actual research.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cause then you can actually prove to people like, this is working. This is not a fantasy. We've got numbers. We can show that this is really incredibly helpful. I love what you said earlier about WebMD, right? Because you're like, people fall down the rabbit hole of Googling their symptoms when if they can just reach out and get vetted, you know, yes, go in this direction versus the other.
Right. I mean, I joke to patients that WebMD always leads to death. Always, no matter what the complaint is. And, you know, it does give good information, but it doesn't give all information, right? So, you know, if somebody calls me and they're worried about a child having certain things, and I was like, well, no, this isn't, it's not actually, this complaint that you're read about doesn't actually apply to children, right? So things like that are not always clear. So that's just one example, but there's a lot of reasons. And so usually the easiest way to figure that out is just ask the person what they're worried about. Because sometimes they're not always like giving you that direct answer. And so I just like to ask them, okay, what is it you're worried about? So we can definitely get to the bottom of whatever it is you think it is that is going on.
That's brilliant. Because what you're actually talking about, because I think people hear the idea of technology being involved, and there's like a robotic energy, a lack of feeling personal. But what you're describing is people get to be home. So they're in the comfort of their own home. So they're going to be on their turf, a little bit more relaxed. They can turn you off if they get mad at you. You know, they're a little bit more power. And like you're talking about having to build rapport with them in a different way. And I can think of times that I've been in a hospital in the ER and felt intimidated as I'm going through the different chambers. You know, I'm sitting in the waiting room, then I'm passing the front desk. And it can feel really like I'm kind of getting swallowed up in this thing. So it makes sense that I would feel more comfortable. I would share what I'm really feeling, and that the doctor would actually have to work a wee bit harder to build that rapport. Like you said with that line where you're like, what are you worried about? It's a very human thing that you're describing of really being able to connect with them and provide the counseling and the education.
I think that's exactly right, because you can build rapport in this environment. People are more comfortable. But then the other thing is, when I work in the ER, I am constantly being interrupted, right? There's something always happening. Somebody might be in a dire situation. You need to run in there. In this situation, it's really just you and your patient. There aren't those interruptions to get in the way of having that rapport and having those discussions. And you're right, all of these clinics can be intimidating. ERs can certainly be intimidating. You may be close to somebody, you may be sitting like very near them, and you may just not feel comfortable asking those questions. So this takes that away, like you described it.
That's awesome. Are you at all interested in sharing what it's like in terms of the burnout that you experienced way back then, and how this has been a lot more, it's helped you kind of conserve your energy a bit more?
Sure. It's hard to describe it because it's hard to describe emotions that you've worked through to some degree, but I will say that it just made me burnout, and a lot of people describe it in different ways. But for me personally, when I would go in the ER, I just didn't want to be there. I would be short-tempered. I was more impatient. I probably wasn't as friendly as I could be to colleagues, to just anywhere. And I didn't really like that person at all. So, again, there's a lot of reasons for burnout that end up being systemic, but coming out of it, telemedicine, about one thing I'll tell you, it doesn't always take away that symptom unless you figure out what's causing it, because you can also burn out just doing, 60 telemedicine calls over 12 hours. You can burn out still. But I think for me, I figured out how to do it by being able to do all of these different things, especially where I work now, doing the teaching, the research, doing quality assurance, having a hand in other types of topics. All of that actually makes it easier. And the fact that I don't do one type of clinical work anymore, that has actually helped tremendously.
Wow, that's awesome. You're making me think about the stress that ER docs have to deal with, or just practitioners have to deal with, especially when you're talking about the ER and the nervous system experience of being a doctor, and you're sitting and focusing on one person, but then alarms are going off or codes are going off and you have to go in the other direction. To constantly have to be switching just sounds incredibly stressful. And then you're talking about, actually, when I'm doing telemedicine, I can sit down, focus. And then I just love the creative avenues that you've woven in, where you're and I get to move around and learn about these other things and build out these other things. So there's a lot of creativity in what you're doing, which is amazing. And I think people get really stuck where it's it has to be all science and super rigid, or it can be artistic and creative. And it's almost like you're blending those. You're taking a really creative, innovative idea and really making it credible, science-based, all those things that you're talking about with quality assurance. That's so cool. I'm so proud of you.
Thanks. And that's funny. When people were like, what are you doing? You should stay forever as an ER doctor. We took a chance. And now I really think, going to help the city. Not always. It's going to take everybody, but if we can even keep one person from infecting 30 people instead of one, that would be something.
Well said. All right, Libby.
Bye. Thank
you.
Bye,
sweetie. Thanks again.
Of course. This was great.